Hello everyone, Kristina here. Welcome to another video on my YouTube channel. The idea behind this card started when I wondered if I could combine watercoloring with ink blending and stenciling. So I'm starting out with my Cara Medallion stencil pack, as well as some Fabriano Artistico extra white cold press watercolor paper. I tried to stick it to my grip mat, but that watercolor paper is too soft, didn't want to stick. So instead, I'm going to use a little bit of masking tape to hold this stencil to the watercolor paper. So I'm taking the full design stencil from the stencil pack. In the stencil pack, you have this full design, and then you have additional stencils that you could use if you wanted to ink blend and color just specific segments of the pattern. So you have options. For this particular card that I did, I used the full design from the stencil pack. And once again, this is the Cara Medallion stencil pack. So I taped all four sides, and then I needed to put down some paper, so I put paper underneath, and then I brought in some distress inks. I picked distress ink specifically because I know it works extremely well with water. It's dye-based and it's formulated to flow, and it's just beautiful when you add water to it. So I did one layer of a bunch of these colors. I used mustard seed, picked raspberry, used a little bit of Seedless Preserves, chipped sapphire, and rustic wilderness. So I just wanted to get like little spotlights of color in different segments on this 5x7 watercolor paper. I'm putting down quite a bit of ink, but the watercolor paper, because it is so thick and absorbent, it really pulls in a lot of that ink. And even though I really feel like I'm adding a lot of ink here, you'll notice here when I get to the end that they're all kind of really faded. There's nothing super bright or saturated. And I was going to go with that, but this is an experiment, right? I don't really know how this is going to work at this point. I wasn't anticipating, or I had no clue how exactly it would go. So I'm filling in some of those last little gaps, adding more and more color, trying to fill in each little area of the card. I'm getting close here. I'm almost done. And before I remove the stencil, I'm going to take a microfiber cloth and wipe down that stencil just to get any of that ink off that I can, so it makes it easier to clean the stencil. So I'm peeling it off. You can see it is showing the design, but everything looks quite muted right now. Nothing's super, super bright. The first thing I wanted to try with adding water was spraying the water directly onto the pattern just with a spray bottle. So I'm using a distress sprayer, and I'm going to spray just kind of all over this. A few little sprays. My bottle wasn't working, so I had to get it moving over there. Then I came back and spritzed it with a few little sprays of water, kind of let it sit for a minute, and then I brought my paintbrush to it to see if I could move some of that water around right over the pattern. Now at this point I was doubtful. I didn't know if I would like it like this, and I kind of decided to stop at this point and dry it, and I'm going to add more ink on top. I'm going to put the stencil back on, and I'm going to add more ink on top. Mostly because as I started adding water straight down onto the pattern, I realized that distress ink, because it is so fluid once it gets wet, it really kind of blobbed out, and I started losing a lot of that pattern. You can see right there in the center off to the right that it's really softened the pattern. You're kind of losing the pattern in that area. And I wanted to see if I could use water in a way that would retain the pattern. So I applied the stencil back on top. I lined it up exactly where it was, and I taped it back down onto the surface. So you definitely could have done this from the start, just taped the watercolor paper to a board, put the stencil on, and then blended from there. I just didn't really know what I wanted to do quite yet. So at this point, I brought in a second layer of all of these distress inks in the same areas where I had them before. Now, of course, maybe some of them overlapped because, you never can get the exact same spots. But adding this second layer of color really brought up the saturation of the inks. I think it added a lot more brightness, and it was generally more what I had anticipated it to look like. So this was a really good sort of accident that happened. So I removed my stencil and it brought back that pattern. And now I'm going to come in and paint each one of these little segments individually. And I love how this turned out. It was very time consuming. So I took my time and painted each one of these segments. But in the end, it started to sort of look like stained glass. And I thought that was just such a really neat kind of way to look at this. So I'm going to speed up the video footage and turn on some music, and I'll come back when the painting's finished.
Wondering if thousands of miles away the sky's just as blue. It's as if I'm stuck in yesterday when I'm thinking of you. 'Cause when you have your morning coffee, I'm turning out the lights so I could dream. And when you smile through the screen, I wish you could be with me. So I lay my head to rest when the sun is rising. I'll start a brand new day when the moon is shining. I long to be with you in all the places you have been. So today I am time traveling. Da-dun-dun-dun. Oh, today I am time traveling.
And every time that you are closing your eyes, I will be beside you. And my heart will glide across the miles to fly right to you. 'Cause when I dive into the traffic, the echo of your voice is all I hear. I'm never tired of your laughing so far, but ever so near. So I lay my head to rest when the sun is rising. I start a brand new day when the moon is shining. I long to be with you in all the places you have been. So today I am time traveling. So today I am time traveling. So I lay my head to rest when the sun is rising. I'll start a brand new day when the moon is shining. I long to be with you in all the places you have been. So today I am time traveling. Da-dun-dun. Oh, today I am time traveling.
I searched through my stash of products looking for something I could use for a greeting that wouldn't kind of take up too much of that background. Wanted something small so that that background could really take center stage on the card. So I ended up using my Encouraging Words stamp set and dies. I stamped a small little sub greeting on this black cardstock, but I also have a plan to use one of the smaller die cut greetings. So as far as this embossed greeting goes, I've come across over the last, well gosh, I've been sort of collecting in my head all of these small embossed greeting tips over the years. So if you've watched any of my videos as of late, even specifically my last live from a few days ago, I've shared these tips, and I think they're so important if you want to have a really good result when you're doing embossing with these small greetings. So I stamped the greeting. Well, first of all, I used lots of anti-static powder. Then I stamped the greeting in a pigment ink, and I used white pigment ink here from Concord and Ninth. Stamped that very gently 2 or 3 times. When I apply the embossing powder, you want to like pour the powder on top and then kind of move the paper around and give it a chance to stick to all the different sides of the letters. You know, tip your cardstock left and right, tap it a few times. And then when you heat it with your heat tool, heat from underneath. I got that tip from Jennifer McGuire and it absolutely works. It heats things really evenly. Once it's cooled down, use a microfiber cloth and a little bit of pressure to wipe off the cardstock, and it takes away all that extra anti-static powder, and you're left with a very clean embossed grading. I think it just works extremely well, and I've been really pleased with how these are looking. So now I'm going to use one of the dies from my Kristina's Essentials dies set. This is the small little one-line kind of sentiment strip die. It is 4 1/4 wide. I'm not going to be using that full width today, but I am cutting it out and getting that lined up. Another tip here is that when you run it through your die cutting machine, run it through at an angle. You see how my grading strip is tipped there? I think you get a better cut when it goes through your die cutting machine at an angle. And I'll use that same tip when it comes to cutting out the watercolor pattern as well. So right now I'm putting some Altenew adhesive sheet on the back of this white cardstock. I'm going to be cutting out the "You Can Count on Me" greeting from the Encouraging Words dies. And I'm going to be cutting it out, I think, a total of 4 times. So for this first one, I'm going to be putting it directly on that shadow layer that I've cut out of the same black that I used for my sub greeting. So when you put the adhesive sheet on the back of the cardstock, it sort of makes the entire die cut like a sticker. You have adhesive on the back. I found the easiest thing to do to get rid of all the little interior pieces. If the die cut stays in your die, put the die down onto a piece of scratch paper, and then you can poke out the areas you don't need. And those little tiny stickers, you know, in the middle of the letters, stick down to the scratch paper. And it's easier to do that than having to, you know, poke them out individually while you're holding up the die cut. So I place that down right on top of that black shadow layer. And then, like I said, I'm going to be stacking these. So I cut out that "You Can Count on Me" greeting 3 additional times. And making them into stickers like this was super fast and easy. I really love using the adhesive sheets on the back of the cardstock for this because there's no glue kind of coming out from between the layers of the stacked grading, and it just looks really, really clean. The Altenew adhesive sheets, they give you a little bit of time that you can, you know, manipulate whatever you're gluing together, but once you add pressure, it's very strong and the adhesive really holds. So it gives you just a little bit of time, not nearly as much slip as you would have with a liquid glue or something like that, but I think the trade-off of not being able to move it around so much versus, you know, not having any glue, messy glue coming out anywhere, hands down, I go for the adhesive sheets. That has been something I've been doing for the last year or so, and I've really enjoyed it. I'm now using my A7 thin frames and A7 thin frames, and then the more thin frames die set. I initially just came out with the A7 frames and the A2 thin frames, and then I wanted to add an in-between size. So I came out with some dies that have the in-between size for both sets. So this gold frame is from the more thin frames die set. And then the actual rectangle that I cut out here in the middle of the watercolor pattern, that was cut out using the smallest rectangle in the A7 thin frames die set. I think it's the second one, maybe even. So I just adhered that down onto a white card base, and then I put some glue on the back of my larger die cut greeting, kind of positioned that near the top of the card. And then I'm going to put that sub greeting right below, and I want to have it popped up on a little bit of foam tape so that it gives it some dimension. That larger greeting above is stacked, it's very substantial, so I wanted to have this hang in there sub greeting popped up a little bit as well. So there is the finished card for today. I love how this turned out. It really did give it kind of a stained glass look. Just a different way to use their stencils. I think it was a great experiment. Thanks for watching, and I will see you all on Monday for my regular weekly live stream. I hope you'll come back and spend some time with me on Monday for some crafting. Thanks so much for watching.